Many people think that the metagame in Marvel Snap is limited to the decks that I show in my tier list videos, so these are some decks that some highly ranked players are succeeding with in Marvel Snap that were not within a stone's throw of my tier list videos, just to show you how many things you can try and experiment with in this metagame. It's not always going to be easy to make videos like this, which is why I like to take the opportunity in these open metagames that we have to make such videos. We are in a metagame where there's a lot of diversity and a lot of potential ways to explore, and these decks are taking unique angles on doing so. This specific list was put together by Zombies Go Nom Nom, but I've seen a lot of people messing around in this space, and I think it's one that actually does bear some real exploration here. Evolving your bad units has never been a thing that hasn't been a part of Marvel Snap. Merlin has that as a pretty prominent part of his kit. Annihilus got Cersei when she came out, and you were evolving the Void off of Sentries. It's a pretty common thing to do. But with the release of Misery, many people have opted for, instead of these kind of ways of getting rid of cards like the Hood, doubling up on the Hood in different ways. What this deck does is aim higher up the curve, specifically with Omega Sentinel. Omega Sentinel's power is almost entirely locked into her effect. And going from 3 to 4 and 4 to 5 are typically the breakpoints at which you start seeing very decent returns on your investment in evolving something. Going up to 5, I think, might actually be the best evolution you can take, especially on a 4-drop where most of the power is in the effect. There's a lot of good bodies at 5. You can expect to see mostly like 7 or 8 power come out of there, and sometimes you get something really big. And that means that you have a lot of different ways to get that kind of power. It's not just, oh, I'm evolving the Void and getting a 5 out of that, which is obviously good. You're evolving Omega Sentinel with a Merlin spell and evolving the Void with a Cersei. And so you have this ability to attack multiple lanes, to get this power down, and to generate a lot of power in ways that people aren't particularly prepared to interact with. This kind of deck was notably worse only a few weeks ago, when Juggernaut was sort of making the rounds as a major part of the metagame. In Juggernaut Cosmo metagames, it can be very difficult to try to rely on turning downside into upside when those cards can really stop it, but we're not in those anymore. We're in very different metagames, and yes, okay, sometimes your opponent's Stardust is going to shut down your Sentry's ability to make a Void, which in theory is good for you, so you're probably fine with that. This is a deck that has a lot of power in it just as a baseline. It is able to compete with a lot of stuff, and the goal with a deck like this is and should be to outpower the mid-range decks that are actually devoting slots to tech. And you can get a lot of points on the board against something like a mid-range Invisible Woman deck. You should just be able to have more numbers than they are capable of dealing with, whether or not they're playing Mobius Stardust or not. A real blast from the past, Big Baby, a player from Marvel Snap's Before Time, is back playing the game just a little bit, and as always is playing some absolute garbage and doing very well with it. Of course, I should say this is actually a pretty good deck right now. Obviously, if Mobius exists, you get very sad, which is why we have many other ways of making sure that we get a lot of energy so that Mobius doesn't totally ruin 100% of our game plan. There are a couple really cool things going on in this list, and Lord knows I've lost to this kind of stuff. I typically am not in the business of playing around double Shadow King. It's definitely the kind of thing that can win various matchups, and frankly, Absorbing Man as a stats card is doing a lot of work in this deck as well. You have Gwenpool you can double up on, you have Sage you can double up on, you have Hit Monkeys you can double up on, and with this amount of energy and this amount of discount, you're really just expanding the range very much beyond what many decks are able to handle right now. you should basically always be in whatever game, as long as you're able to cobble together a couple of the right cards for the situation you're in. This is a deck that has beef in it, and very importantly, is able to choose where that beef goes late into the game. It's a classic good player deck. One of the dynamics in Marvel Snap that I've noticed is the higher up you get on ladder, the more people prize the ability to redistribute and distribute the largest amount of their power on turn 6, which is why you see so many decks like that. But I think a lot of people lower down tend to think of Serra as a deck that is not necessarily in that vein. It's a tech deck, it's a control deck. And this is saying, no, I don't want my opponent to be able to determine whether my cards work or not. I don't want to have to be subject to that. Also, it's kind of a bad meta for Shang-Chi. But this is saying, I'm going to play like a bounce deck. I'm going to just play a million points on the final turn of the game. Good luck figuring out where they are. Good luck doing the math on even beating them in the first place. I not only have a Serra, I also have 8 energy alongside my Serra. It's a pretty straightforward setup and punchline, but it is surprisingly effective even now. Many people know Zenade as the Sauron 1-trick. Well, he's branching out. He's now a 2-trick. He plays decks that would normally have Sauron, but he cut it to do other weird stuff. Really, if you get down to it, he's actually, if you really want to zoom in, I think he's probably a Starbrand 1-trick. But this deck is effectively a solid Nightmare deck. Now, one thing Zenade is very, very clear about every time we talk about Nightmare is that Nightmare and Sauron, there's really only one good target, and it is Starbrand. Hitting a Starbrand, a 3/10, that's a much better thing to do than basically any other of the targets. To him, it is 1A in every single iteration of Sauron and or Nightmare. It is the thing to build around. But when you achieve that level of, I guess, Zen Sauron ascendance, you kind of end up thinking, oh, okay, well, if all the other targets are bad, what if I just had a totally separate deck fused in with this deck? And that's what's happening here. It's a totally separate package just of card generation. And I think for the record, this is a little bit of a canary in a coal mine for a certain Victoria hand, because it's easy to think of these cards as the Victoria hand package, right? You have Iron Patriot, you have Mirage, you have Quinjet. We're not, like, playing her, right? There's no Victoria hand in here. Which is interesting because that deck is often thought of like, oh yeah, these are the cards that are good because of Victoria Hand. But here we see them being good because all of those cards are good. And I think that should sort of recontextualize the way people think about Victoria Hand. Like that's kind of an all-star deck. We're seeing what you might reasonably call the bad half of the deck, like being fused in here. So understanding that this is like gonna do a lot of the same things, just with a lot bigger bodies when it high rolls, that's really, really notable. I really especially want to point out Misery Hood as just a pretty massive outlier. Like, this is not me doing, haha, I think these are going to get OTA predictions, because my Discord is already 100% convinced Victoria Hand is getting nerfed. I'm not really in the business of doing OTA predictions, but I do think that, like, she's pretty good. The Misery stuff, though, I mean, we've been talking about this for a couple weeks now, right? That card's a 4/9 for no reason. Just absolutely no reason. No thought about it whatsoever. Just absolutely nothing going on there. Why that should be a 4/9 instead of a 4/8 or even a 4/7. It's a really good card. And here you see a deck that's like, normally we're going to be doing Hood Misery stuff, but also if I'm not doing that, I'm very, very happy changing this Misery into any other 4 cost because it has 9 power. Little bit of a canary in the coal mine moment for the non-Victoria Hand cards in the Victoria Hand deck, in my opinion. A deck from Smiles that is very close to my own heart is a buff everyone deck. And this is pretty straightforward. It's just setups and payoffs, a classic stats and juggernaut kind of deck. But there is something I want to specifically highlight here, and it is the combination of Silver Surfer First Steps and Gwenpool. I'm not saying this is like a busted thing, but I think it's pretty dramatically underplayed relative to its power, and that might be for a number of reasons. Silver Surfer First Steps released as a 3/4. No one really thought she was good. She released when people were playing a bunch of like other generally pretty strong stuff. She didn't really go with a lot of that stuff. But now I think we have hit a point where mid-range decks are trying to recalibrate around other things, and this is definitely the kind of thing a mid-range deck could and should recalibrate around. Silver Surfer First Steps into Gwenpool is really damn strong. I would rather play it than a Viv Vision every single time it comes up in this deck. By the way, incredibly, one of the notes that Smiles gave to me about this list is that he was 100% sure that Fastos was wrong, but not that he was 100% sure Viv Vision was wrong. So all of you Viv truthers out there, maybe she passes the Fastos bar. All right, we've done it. Viv Vision, perfect card, passes the Fastos bar. Let's go. For the record, if you are looking for a replacement, my instinct was maybe something like a Red Guardian. I typically default towards just like, if I don't want the Xth synergy card, I often want the first generic tech card. And Red Guardian's pretty generic, especially if people are going to be playing more Draculas in the current day and age. I think he could be a pretty solid option. Of course, there are plenty of other generic tech cards, Mobius, Stardust, maybe even a Cosmic Ghost Rider, although I personally doubt it. There's plenty of stuff to look at. We've talked about a couple hella enjoyer tribunal builds. This one is the ladder-friendly version with ease of snapping in mind. I asked him what made it the ladder-friendly version, and he said basically by like turn 3, you should have a pretty good idea what your turn 6, 7 occasionally looks like, and whether or not you're going to be able to do the thing this game. That means that you should be snapping pretty aggressively. So this is a deck that's going to require a lot from you. Snap or retreat early when your opponents are willing to snap and retreat. You have to respect it a lot of the time, so you have to get a lot out of early snaps. Oh, look, my hand has all the cards that let me do the very stupid thing that very few people are playing tech for. I'm just going to snap this on turn 2. Let's go ahead and get this done. Now, this is a deck that I think a lot of people are confused by, right? Like, I got a comment on my last video that was like, why the hell would you even play this? You would much rather play Negative Tribunal. What the hell is going on? And I think a lot of it is this is a deck that is trying to dodge a lot of the relevant tech in the metagame, right? You wouldn't want to play Negative Tribunal because Mobius is everywhere, right? And I talked to Hella Enjoyer about this, and he said, yeah, I had Sarah in the other list over Miss Marvel specifically to try to beat Denish. That's how metagamed things get. In the latter environment, no Sarah, yes this, and we are trying to fully dodge the idea of all of the Mobius various decks of that nature and all of the synergy heavy decks like Discard that are trying to just go a little bit over the top of the Mobius Stardust decks. That is what this deck is trying to prey on. It's trying to beat both of those things at the same time by just having really, really good hands really, really early. Last up is a list that I'm kind of interested in trying Bastion in. It comes from Derek, and it represents sort of we've had so many good 2-drops for so long that we've kind of just gotten used to assuming that the 2-drop slot is like kind of busted. But it's very iffy, I think, a decent amount of the time. And this is a way in which you can make it a little bit better by using Pixie in a sort of small ball way. And that's what this deck is trying to do. You don't need Pixie to be ridiculous. You just need a small discount whenever you can get it. And you have enough redundancy in here that you're willing to do a lot of different things. This is a deck that is meant to do power output. Obviously, if you can get the absolute Nutter Butters, copies of Victoria Hand, copies of Blue Marvel with the Ancient one, there's a lot of massive output that your opponent will not be able to understand or comprehend what's going on when you play against them in this way. But really, a lot of this is just, there's a lot of things that do various energy type things. So we have Quinjet and Pixie, which, yes, if you run into a bunch of Mobius decks, that's not a very good thing for you, but there's a lot of decks that we've talked about both on the tier list and today that are meant to beat up on the Mobius Stardust deck, so at a certain point people will stop playing those, and then suddenly having all this energy cheat is bonkers, right? It's the same premise as like the Big Baby deck, where you're just like, okay, look, we were in the Mobius Stardust meta, now we're in the metagame where people are beating up on Mobius Stardust, and I'm gonna go back to just cheating as hard as I absolutely possibly can. I'm going to put 1 billion points on the board. Good luck dealing with my 1 billion points. And I think Pixie is actually like a little bit underrated in just like decks like this, because a lot of what I like about this and what I've liked about other Pixie decks is like, I don't have to be doing 1s and 6s. I can just do like 5s and 3s and 2s. And then when I get a 5 that costs 3, that's awesome. And when I get a 3 that costs 5, I don't care because I've got so much other crap in my hand that I've generated that it doesn't matter that one of my draws is bricked because I made so many cards during this game. And I think that's kind of a really strong approach to how this metagame is currently setting itself up to be. Thank you so much for watching. I've been KMBest. Let me know if you like this video. It's the kind of thing I want to do when I have the chance, right? When I have a good meta in front of me with a lot of like cool and interesting stuff happening that are like different ways of approaching problems, different ways of point allocation, I think that's a really good time to make a video and remind everyone that like not every meta is terrible. I saw some tweets that were like, I'm so sick of this meta. I'm so bored of this meta. Everyone's playing the same thing. And I don't even know if we're playing the same game. This is not only just a meta that is constantly changing, it's a meta game that has a bunch of different options in it. I gotta tell you, I'm fairly satisfied with this metagame, although there is an OTA on Thursday, so I always want to remind everyone, if you're asking me, should I go ahead and craft whatever card? My answer, as always, is wait for the OTA. Thanks so much for watching. I've been KMBest, you've been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.